Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's department budget hearing. Today is Thursday, April 25, 2024. We have one presentation tonight, Hartford Public Schools Board of Education. I am Councilman Amilcar Hernandez, and I am Chair of the Operation Management, Budget, and Government Accountability Committee. This meeting is broadcasting live on HPA-TV's Xfinity Government Channel 96 and Frontier Government Channel 6032. It will also be streamed via hpa-tv.org, the HPA-TV Facebook page, and HPA-TV Apple TV, Amazon TV, and Roku TV apps. It will also be made available on the HPA-TV YouTube channel. I would like to acknowledge my colleagues here present today. On my far right, Councilwoman Bilodeau, Majority Leader Rossetti, Assistant Majority Clark is somewhere here, Council President Surgeon, Councilman Gale, Councilman Mitchum, and Councilman Thomas. Tonight's presentation will be Hartford Public Schools Board of Education, and tonight we have Superintendent Leslie Torres Rodriguez here with us. Please, you may start your presentation and introduce the leadership that's here today with you as well. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the welcome, and joining me in the presentation is Deputy Superintendent Mr. Paul Foster. Thank you, and let me know when we can begin. Great. So I do want to thank you for the opportunity to present our budget, which was recently adopted by our Hartford Board of Education. Most of these figures are confirmed. There is, as you know, some fluidity in the positions as we work through all of the processes that have to take place given our bargaining agreements. For this year in particular, because of the scale of the reductions in funding, there is ongoing work to make sure that, one, the accuracy of the allocations to schools and departments, as well as, we might expect some shifts in the final numbers as we continue to finalize the attrition. Just to give you an overview of what we're going to cover today, including important background and context on our strategic plan and funding models, and then we'll get into next year's budget and some next steps. First, I'll do a quick broad brush summary, which has been a resource that we've shared with community and with our staff. I'll go through a general overview of the steps taken to develop our budget, including some of the community engagement and feedback from various stakeholders and multiple individual meetings with school leadership. I think it's important to note that our process this year began earlier than in previous years. We started in October. We have forecasted for about 4 years that this would be an exceptionally challenging year, so we wanted to start the process earlier. And this year alone, we've had over 25 different formal touch points with members in our community. We have prioritized community feedback and engagement across several touch points. So we believe that there was a comprehensive process for school and SGC members, as well as meetings with central office to ensure, to the best ability, understanding of the investments moving forward. And we've also engaged our union leadership throughout. So let's get into a high-level overview of our budget compared to last year and how we have looked to balance our budget. Some of the assumptions in the budget include the projected revenue at $429 million and the proposed expenditures, right? The money that will go out at $467 million will go into the strategies that we've identified to close that gap later in the presentation. And I've said before that our revenue is essentially flat since 2020, while our costs have predictably gone up at an increased rate. Our schools are seeing funding that is consistent with what we call the equity-based starter budget, which we'll go into in a few slides. And it was developed several years ago. However, it was slightly modified this year. The majority of our schools, their funding is consistent with the level of the equity-based starter budget. However, what reflects in their budget is a significant reduction because we have had an infusion of funds made possible through pandemic relief funding. And so the budget includes large reductions to central office and district services, other than those in schools. So ultimately, the budget does reflect percentage reduction in funding and in staffing for central office and in schools. So our balance sheet, this is like the aerial view, which includes the reductions that I just referenced. And even with that, right, we were still looking at $38 million to account for next year. There are several mechanisms for starting to close that gap, including, as you see here, a 5% vacancy rate. That is what we're assuming. And then, of course, the ESSER offset. We are able to, at least for the first quarter of next year, able to use some pandemic relief funding. And so that is a mitigation strategy for us, as you can see there, at $9.2 million. We're also counting on the general education tuition cap that was agreed to by the state legislature, which is, we're estimating about $11.5 million. And of course, the non-lapsing fund as well as at 5.6. We'll go into these numbers in more detail, but this is, again, the aerial view. This one is another summary slide relative to staffing changes. I want to emphasize that this slide shows the total number of budgeted full-time equivalent positions. As you know, our vacancy rate remains currently at about 6%. So some of these budgeted positions that are being eliminated are not currently filled with staff members. As of now, 84 of these positions are currently vacant. Additionally, we will try to reduce positions to the extent possible, like I said earlier, via the attrition and with some of the retirees and resignations that we get. We don't know how many, we don't know how that is going to play out. And if any of the position reductions will result in a layoff at this moment, it is too early to tell. I will share that the last time that we had such a large reduction, I think it was in 2017, about 220 positions. At the end of it all, there were 3 individuals that received their notice, and all three were called back. 2 of them came back. 1 had already got a job at another district. Just to give you an example of how long it takes to kind of move through these processes. Only after the bumping process and after those retirements, what will we know exactly the number. So this slide is a high-level summary. At central office, 74 positions will be reduced, which is 18% of the overall positions from this year's budget. A large portion of this is a reduction in our instructional coaches, which were attached to the central office budgets, is visible here in the 25.8 reduction in the direct services to schools. There's also nearly 20% reduction in administration. And as it relates to school-based budgets, those are reduced by about 11%. The largest reduction in school-based positions other than general education teachers. This reflects reductions made in school-based budgets to non-certified positions. We have district allocated positions that remain somewhat consistent because reductions in some of these areas are offset by increases in the special education positions that we have to increase given our individualized education plans that some of our students have. So in total, the proposed budget, the adopted budget reflects a reduction of about 384 positions, 74 in central office and 310 across our schools. This number is substantial, and it does reflect the significance of our fiscal challenge when you overlay the ESSER pandemic relief context. I want to reiterate that, again, it does not equate to the same number of people losing their jobs. We're going to see those reductions again as the process unfolds. We have a current vacancy rate, and there are also positions actually that were funded with ESSER that we always knew were temporary. We were very explicit about that since the minute we got our first COVID relief funding grant. Even in my meetings with our school leaders, almost every month I would say, so remember, we have this infusion of funding that we're likely never going to see again. Hopefully we don't have another pandemic. But $150 million that came in allowed us the opportunity to invest in additional staff to help our students, our staff, and even some of our families, right, recover from the pandemic. Nonetheless, it is a difficult time, and we're not, we know that we're not going to be able to tell everyone what they want to hear relative to the challenging context that we have. So let me get into a little bit of the context. Some of it, I'm sure, will be familiar to some of you, and other pieces will feel like we're going deep into more granularity, but I think it's important for all of us to just be exposed to the information. This is just a high-level overview of the priorities that we have. Those continue to be priorities that were identified in our community. They were important 3 years ago when we went into the pandemic, and still remain at the front and center for us. And then when we think about the budget and the fact that we have to prioritize the focus and the investments, we are not only focused on what we can reduce because we have a deficit. We're not only focused on how many positions can we cut, we also are focused on how can we make efficient and strategic investments. And so all of that needs to be filtered, if you will, through these two key priorities, which is ensuring that our students have access to high-quality classroom instruction, robust professional learning, an effective curriculum, and that student connection is at the front and center across all of our schools through extracurricular, through athletics, through our family engagement, and then continuing to focus on our student mental health, wellness, and well-being. And then the role of central office is to support these two priorities and making sure that those strategies are executed in schools in benefit of our students and staff. Given that this is a very challenging year, it has required that we make some hard decisions in balancing the budget. There is work that we have prioritized to seek to sustain some of the work and investments while moving forward with undoubtedly limited resources. So when we think about those two priorities that I just shared, under high quality instruction, we are ensuring that teaching positions are funded at levels noted in our equity-based starter budget. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. That the district allocated staff, like our special education teachers, our bilingual educators, that they're being allocated to respond to student needs. We will continue to provide instructional coaching. Our instructional coaches support our teachers, especially our newer teachers or teachers that are not familiar with our curriculum. We are going to still have instructional coaching, and we'll also allocate funding for instructional supplies and high-quality instructional materials. And we are going to ensure that career pathways at the high school level are still rigorous and meaningful for our students, as well as ensuring that we maintain our alternative learning pathways to ensure that for those students that are either disengaged or disconnected, that they still have an entry point into their educational journey. On the other side of that, the other strategy, student engagement and connection, social workers and counselors will be funded at levels noted in our equity-based starter budget. Although we have needed to reduce the requirements for full-time and music teachers in each school, there will be art, music, or dance, as well as athletics in all schools. Our community school partners will continue and will also continue to have family and student engagement staff in our schools. And we also are guaranteeing stipends so that schools and staff can support with extracurricular or other activities. And I know that it's natural, right, to focus on the reductions because, right, that's an impact to staff. But I wanted to also highlight that we're being mindful of what we're able to provide and prioritize to students and our staff as well. So it is no secret, you've probably, some of these graphics might resonate from previous presentations that I've done for some of you. Right, we're facing tremendous financial headwinds that are increased by systemic challenges in funding systems and some demographic trends that are impacting certainly the state and many others across, certainly our city, many across the state and even the country. We know that the school-age population in Hartford is declining, as you can see with the red line in the graph in the, on the left-hand side. At the same time, enrollment in Hartford Public Schools has declined by about 21%. When you see there over, the last, back to 2010, 2011, which is due to these the demographic trends that I've just referenced, as well as the school choice ecosystem that we operate in. And over the same period of time, and because of the school choice ecosystem, you'll see that tuition has grown by almost 200%, which is about, over $120 million, while the overall revenue has remained essentially the same. So, right, we have more obligations outside of our district, and at the same time, it's like the same amount of money, which means that what we're able to do in district is significantly challenged. And so we need to kind of, right, see how we can adjust to this reality until we have a longer-term solution, which I believe has to happen at the legislative level. So if we dig a little deeper into the revenue for next year, for fiscal year 2025, it's projected to be almost identical to what it was in the year 2019-2020, right, which was the year that we shut down for the pandemic. The last budget that we adopted before the pandemic, like if we think about it, our revenues are actually down by about $350,000 from that 2019-2020 year. And then during that same time, like over the past couple of years, our tuition has increased by more than $30 million. So I just want to kind of make that point again, that since before the pandemic, our revenues have gone down by about $300,000, while the tuition has increased by about $30 million. That's a significant challenge for us to grapple with. So with that backdrop and that context, I'm going to dive into, well, before I dive into the actual numbers, I'll just touch really quickly on some engagement. And I do want to reiterate that I do believe this has been the most extensive and comprehensive process compared to all the others that we have had in the past, in large part because we have been forecasting these challenges for some time, and we wanted to make sure that as many voices as possible were heard. So back, right, you can see here, back in October, we began with brainstorming sessions and then had some community forums, SGC overviews. In March, we kicked with a similar overview for our community-based organizations and our faith-based leaders, and a second review with our SGCs, our school governance councils, and our school leaders. Meetings with our union leadership, and then, of course, the board adopted our budget on the 16th of April. So I'm going to dive into some of the numbers. On the left, you'll see the total money, the revenue broken out by several sources: the education cost sharing, the city contribution, other state funds, federal and private or other, with a large chunk. The chunk that you see there in red, that is $51 million shown to represent, that represents the ESSER funding. Because we had about $50 million of all of the ESSER funding across the 3 years. And the $51 million reflects both positions and non-position expenses. So with ESSER nearly almost exhausted, and the deadline for spending being September, right, the next September, that red slice, right, we're not going to have that next year. It doesn't carry over to 2025. So even though the chart on the right shows a larger share of revenue coming from ECS, the education cost share, the total amount of funding is smaller by about $40 million. So I guess like the headline here, the biggest takeaway is that non-ESSER funding, including that from the city, when we look back, hasn't really changed. Though we've had, right, the rising costs that we have seen, and this has been persistent for over 5 years. I will note that the state has increased the education cost sharing and has pledged to find ways to mitigate some of the general education tuition costs. Those efforts are effectively negated by flat or decreased revenue from, right, all the other funding sources. But nonetheless, this gives you a high-level overview as to the money that comes in, that's coming in. And then on the other side, the money going out, it shows the recently adopted allocation of resources or expenses. So again, if we go to the left side, we see the allocation of over $508 million, which included those ESSER funds, 36% in the equity-based starter budgets. Those are the school-based budgets. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. 18% in school funding allocated centrally, because not all of the supports and staff that are at schools are in their budgets. Many are also at central office, in the central office budget. 27% in fixed expenses. We're talking about tuition, transportation. 15% in central services and supports provided in schools, and about 4% is administration. On the right side, we see the changes after the adopted reductions. So the percent of fixed expenses has increased to almost 33%, and school funding allocated centrally increased to almost 20%, with a modest actual increase, right? This includes an increase in positions that are needed to meet the needs of our special education students. The equity-based starter budgets decreased by 32% of the overall, largely because of the increase in tuition. Central office expenditures also see a reduction in percent across all three categories. We'll dive into those in a minute. So I guess the big headline here is that the percent that we need to allocate to fixed expenses has only gone up, and that needs to be kind of taken, right, from all areas, including those that are doing direct services, providing direct services to school. One other summary slide here, and we presented this in the executive summary a few slides ago, but just to reiterate that this slide and the slides that follow, and Deputy Foster, you can go into the details in the next slides, right, is again, it shows the total number of budgeted full-time equivalent positions, with a reminder that we have a current vacancy rate at 6%. So some of those budgeted positions that are being eliminated are not currently filled with staff members, right? Those are 84. There is an 18% reduction in central office positions, with an 11% reduction in those school-based positions. So again, right, the 384, 74 in central office, and 310 across schools. Some of these, a significant amount of these were funded through ESSER, and you can see there in this one picture how many of those were ESSER funded. So Deputy Foster, I can tag you in to maybe you can unpack some of these specifics.
Yeah, thank you, Superintendent. So the next 6 slides, I'm just going to go back one slide for a moment and say, for the next 6 slides, and I'm going to move relatively quickly, but they enumerate the position reductions in each of the 6 areas that you see on that slide. So the direct service to schools, direct support to schools, administration, et cetera. And we're doing this, we did this in our presentation with the board and in our public presentations, because we're trying to be as transparent as possible around where the position reductions are. And also, what I think you'll see as you look at the next 6 slides is The position reductions are across really all position types. There's a couple exceptions which I will note, but because of the fiscal situation that the superintendent talked about, we really had to look at every area of the budget and every position. And so the first one here is general education teachers. And so you can see these by subject areas taught. These are positions that the decision-making happens at the building level. So one of the pivots we made in our budgeting process this year, the superintendent has referenced the equity-based starter budget, which is the formula we've used for several years for determining the allocation to each school. Part of what's happening in this budget cycle is, with the benefit of COVID relief dollars, we had the opportunity to fund our schools significantly above the level of that equity-based starter budget, and this year we went right and funded exactly at that level, and that's why you see some of the reductions. But one of the changes we made, because we knew we would be facing these reductions, is we empowered school leaders to make choices in their building about which positions they would retain based on the needs in their specific school. So we felt like school leaders, as the individuals closer to the work and closer to our students, would be better positioned to make those choices than those of us at the central office. So this is an example of one set of positions where the decision-making happened at the building level. You do see the bottom line number for general education teacher reductions at 162 positions. I do want to highlight 45 and a half FTEs represent resource teachers. Those are teachers that are hugely beneficial in our schools and support teaching and learning happening in our schools. We were able to add significant numbers of resource teachers with the benefit of COVID relief dollars. So I just want to be clear that even though the bottom line number is 162, not every one of those positions was sort of full-time every day, all day in the classroom, given that some of them were in that resource teacher role. Moving to another category, these are all of the other positions besides general education teachers where the decision-making happened at the school building level. And so you see the administration, principal, assistant principal, clerical support, counselor, social worker. So many of these positions are support positions that are supporting, student behavior, student wellness, and there are, as you can see, some significant reductions here. I think we're being honest when we say, right, none of these are reductions that we take lightly. So when you see, for example, 22.8 fewer social workers, we do have real concerns about the wellness and mental health needs of our students, and COVID relief dollars gave us the opportunity to expand the services we offered, and we have to pull back on that somewhat given the budget situation. You see that with social workers. You see it with our student engagement specialists who support students with really attendance, getting to school, and meeting and addressing some of the needs that students might have that are preventing them from getting to school. Behavior technicians, family, community, and school support providers, so our specialists in family engagement. So again, you do see reductions across the board, and with some of our paraeducator positions as well. Now, the next category, this is what the superintendent talked about, is positions that are allocated centrally to schools. So these are positions that live in schools, they're in school budgets, but the decision-making happens at the district level for very specific reasons the superintendent talked about. Special education positions, bilingual resource positions, TESOL positions. The number of positions needed in a given school is a function of the level of need of the individual students in that school. And so it's not as simple as what's the enrollment and sort of divide by a certain number. In the case of nurses, custodians, and school safety officers, that's really a function of level of need in the building. In the case of custodians, the size of the facility. But again, you do see, for the most part, reductions. But this is also a category where you heard the superintendent say there's some increases, some decreases offset by some increases. Notably, you see 44 additional special education paraeducators. That is, again, a function of level of student need. So students in their individualized education plan will have a number of hours of service that are necessary from an adult, from a paraeducator, and we have to follow that to be in compliance. And so that's really offsetting, in this category, reductions you see in other areas. I do want to make one note. Even though it says 16.5 reduction in school security officers, we're only reducing the number of positions by about half that. What we're also doing to attempt to be strategic with reduced resources is creating a pool of 8 floater security officers so that we have a small team. So rather than having sort of every security officer kind of permanently assigned to a given building, having 8 security officers who we can float to buildings as needs arise in the building, in the community around the building. And so even though you see the 16.5, in a later slide, you're going to see an increase of 8 in the safety department budget, and that's those 8 floater positions. So moving to central services, and again, we have 3 categories here. We have direct service to schools. These are positions that are in the central office budget. So if you look at our budget book, you would see these positions, the funding for them in our central office budget. These are individuals who are spending almost all of their time in schools providing direct service. You see our athletics, you see health clinics, college and career specialists, health services, psychology. Speech language is primarily speech language pathologists providing regular service to students. And then what you see as teaching and learning, that is coaches. So you heard the superintendent say we're maintaining our instructional coaching program. We're doing it at a much reduced level. So there's been a reorganization in our Office of Academics to ensure that we can continue to provide coaching, albeit at a pretty significantly lower level when you see the 32 fewer instructional coaching positions, or teaching and learning, I should say, positions. Moving to direct support to schools. These are departments where, again, the positions and the funding for the positions lives in the central office budget. But again, these are departments that are out in schools providing direct support to schools on a daily basis. So safety and security being one example, special education, obviously transportation, our welcome center where families come when they have concerns. You can see for the most part, reductions across the board in positions. This is where there is that one increase of 8 safety officers in the safety budget, and again, offset by the reduction of 16 in the safety officers permanently assigned to individual schools. Lastly is administration. So this is really what you think. When you think central office, I think this is what most people think of, right? It's finance, it's talent, it's the superintendent and I. The other departments you see here, and again, you see a reduction of about 17 and a half positions. I do want to emphasize in this slide, you see on the 1920 column, so 1920 is the budget, the last budget that was adopted previous to the pandemic. And what you can see there is we had 87 positions in these administration departments prior to the pandemic. Next year we will have 74. So I just want to emphasize, yes, we are scaling back from what we had because of the benefit of COVID relief dollars, but the reductions are significantly further than that when you look at administration in terms of scaling back even to below where we were pre-pandemic. And again, this is a slide that you already saw in our executive summary, but just to recap it, you have the revenues that we showed you on the donut chart, right? The revenues went from 471 million to 429 million with that red slice, right? The ESSER relief funding slice going away. Our expenses going from 508 to 466. And so what you see at the bottom is, right, our deficit mitigation. So the different strategies we applied in order to get to a balanced budget. And so we assumed a 6% vacancy rate in 24. That's why you see a much larger number for vacancy savings. Really 2 reasons. We assumed a 6% vacancy rate, and with a reduction of 384 positions, right, a 5% vacancy rate is a percentage against a lower amount of salary and benefits. So that's why you see a pretty significant drop in how much we can mitigate with vacancy savings. Again, the superintendent really talked about these other categories, and so these are the strategies we've employed thus far to get to a mostly balanced budget. You can see the line there that says expense task to solve during the year, right? We still have about 1.2 million that we're approaching, and the board is approaching as an expense task that we will find reductions over the course of the year to make up that final 1.2 million.
We do have a few slides that are part of an extended appendix, but we're not going to go through all of them, but I do want to just review a few of the slides. We've talked about equity-based starter budgets, and that is, we've introduced some new terminology that goes along with that, and so I just wanted to unpack that a little bit before we open up for some questions, as this is what the school budgets are, how they're comprised. The first component of that is what I termed as equity-based starter budget, which represents that darker green component there, and it is the second largest piece of the pie next to those fixed expenses. So this includes general education certified and non-certified staff, our curricular programming, administration, and was allocated to schools with additional flexibility given the limited resources. So this ensures that our schools were able to prioritize either, themes and other unique aspects of their specific school community. In the next slide, the next piece that I want to highlight is funding that is allocated centrally. These are resources that are part of the school's overall operation and budget, but the allocations are determined by student need. For example, special education teachers, bilingual educators, or they're identified by the specific school. For example, a school, given its size, might need more security guards, nurses, or custodians because they have a larger footprint, for example. We also allocated staffing for our Hope Academies. You might have heard of our Hope Academies. Those are alternative education programming, and our student success centers that are located at our 3 comprehensive high schools. That has also been allocated centrally so that our schools did not have to account for these programs in their school-based budgets. For funding for things like instructional supplies, stipends for teachers, substitute teachers, overtime, athletics, all of that is also allocated at the district level. So these 2 pieces make up what is largely considered to be like the school's budget, and what would be represented in the budget books for each school. But there are additional pieces that are significant aspects of how our schools are funded. So for example, there's a smaller but not insignificant part of the overall budget is allocated for central office direct services to schools. Example, instructional coaches, because we want to help support our teachers as well. Health services, speech and language support, school psychologists. While these positions, they're included in the central office budget, the staff are working in schools or they serve a network of schools every single day. The last portion of funding for schools is that of central office direct support to schools, which includes supports like our family engagement, security, the special education department, the welcome center team, the academics department, buildings and grounds. Again, while these positions and the costs appear in the central office budget, they reflect supports that are provided to our schools. So the overall percent of the budget that is directly serving staff and students in schools is almost 64%, while the percent that goes toward fixed costs is 33%. Again, reminder, fixed costs, primarily tuition and transportation. So while the ratio of school budgets to fixed expenses, like it's not the ideal, and really is not a sustainable one, it is the reality that we're operating in. So we have prioritized maintaining as much money as possible in the 4 buckets, right, that make up funding for services in schools. So we can get into a few examples of some of the school-based contexts and what actually the allocations are at the school level. Deputy Foster?
Yeah, so just to put a little bit of numbers behind what we called our equity-based starter budget, what you see here is essentially the numbers that went into determining the level of funding that was provided to each of our individual schools over for the purposes of the FY25 budget. And these, I should say, with one exception, these reflect the same levels in the equity-based starter budget formula that we've used for the last several years. The one change is in the category you see at the very bottom, the flexible dollars and SEL supplements. We reduced those per pupil allocations by 25%, knowing the budget challenge we were facing. Other than that, these schools were, the funding that was given to schools was based on this, and so I'll just walk through quickly what we mean by that. And I do want to highlight, we do have on here schools we are required to have the following, so we did make some choices around prioritizing some things. There were also some areas where we did make some exceptions when a school had a strong case as they were building their school-based budget. So I'll give you an example that we prioritized art and music and the arts in general in the FY25 budget. And you would have seen on the slide with the positions The reductions there are not as large as they are in some other areas. But there are some schools that, for example, made a choice. I think there are 3 schools who had a music teacher this current fiscal year who don't have one in the budget for next year. And there are 3 schools who had an art teacher in the budget this fiscal year and don't have it next fiscal year. But those are the only places where they went from having it this year to not having it next year, because we did also have some schools in this current fiscal year who did not have an art or music teacher already. And some of that is because some of our schools have drama and dance programs and have prioritized that relative to their arts programming. And we also have themes, as you know. With our magnet schools, we have themes, and some of our schools made choices around prioritizing themes. So for example, as our principals were making difficult decisions with their budgets, if a school had a STEM focus, for example, they may have made choices to prioritize science and engineering instructional positions or science and tech ed instructional positions. And so there are some exceptions in some cases, and we can certainly get into more of that if that would be helpful. So just to really quickly talk about when we say this equity-based starter budget formula, what do we mean when we say that, and how do we actually use it? So I'm going to give a quick example of how we calculated this, because again, in previous years with the equity-based starter budget, we used this formula and just allocated positions to schools. Because we were giving principals more discretion this year, we gave them a pot of money based on the positions. And so I'm going to walk through an example of how we did that. So this is the teacher line in our equity-based starter budget. And you can see in the blue box, I know it's a little bit small, there's a formula. So when we're going to say 9th to 12th grade students, we take 9th grade enrollment and we divide it by 21. And that's how we determine how many teaching positions would be allocated to a school based on that 9th grade enrollment. And in this year's case, we then took that and turned it into dollars. And so this is really, I apologize, I'm going too deep in the weeds, but this is the way we're doing the math, right? So I just gave that example. If we have a school projected to have 115 9th graders in 24-25, all we're doing in terms of allocating funding to schools is we're taking 115, dividing by 21, and rounding up. That yields 6 teachers. And because we were giving schools a funding allocation, not a position allocation, the average salary and benefits for a teacher is $96,486. So we're essentially multiplying that times 6. And so that became one building block of a school's school-based funding allocation. We did the same with the non-position funding. So this is just another example. If you had a school with 326 pre-K to 5th grade students, we gave them 326 students times $260 in that flexible dollar allocation. So the other thing I just want to speak to very quickly, right, is if you look at our budget book, you will see differences in the level of reductions from one school to another. And that is, as the superintendent and I have talked about, because of the benefit of the additional funding we've had over the last several years, schools have been funded significantly above the level of the equity-based starter budget, and it wasn't always equal in terms of how much a particular school was above the equity-based starter budget level. And so I'm just giving you an example here to illustrate this point. So if you have 2 schools that in FY24, one of them had 53 positions and one of them had 29 positions, and in this case, I'm talking about general ed teaching positions, which are, again, the positions that are allocated through the equity-based formula. So you can see these 2 schools, one has an enrollment of 753, one has an enrollment of 666. And so based on the formula that I walked through, those schools would have 38 and 33 general ed teaching positions, or the funding for that many positions, respectively, in the FY25 budget. But you can see how different that is than the 53 and 29 these 2 schools have in FY24. And so by applying the equity-based starter budget, you can actually see in this example how many general ed positions each of these schools has in their FY25 budget at 36 and 30. So they're much closer, and they're also much closer to the number of positions that should be allocated through the equity-based starter budget. And the last part of this slide is just to highlight, because one of the questions you might ask is, why didn't you just take a flat percentage and reduce every school by the same percentage? And the last line here is meant to answer that question. Say, for example, we just took every school's budget for FY24 and cut it by 12%. In this example, and this is a real example, by the way, School 2 would have 26 positions, which would be 7 positions less than they should have based on the equity-based formula. And school 1 would have 47 positions, which is 9 positions more than they would have based on the equity-based starter budget. And so you can see the sort of ultimate conclusion at the bottom. If we had done a flat percentage reduction, we would have had one school that has 1 teacher for every 16 students and another school with 1 teacher for every 26 students. So I'm giving that as an example to illustrate the reasoning behind using the equity-based starter budget to determine the funding allocation to schools.
That is, we're good. We're going to pause there.
All right, thank you, Superintendent Torres Rodriguez, and thank you, Deputy Superintendent Foster, for your presentation. I'm going to open up the floor for my colleagues to make any statements or ask any questions. We're going to have 2 rounds of questions. On the first round, we're going to potentially ask 1 to 2 questions, and then on the second round, we'll ask any other follow-up questions remaining. I'm going to start on this side and see if there's any. Councilwoman Rosado.
Thank you, Dr. Leslie Torres Rodriguez, and thank you to your staff. That was a great presentation. I have a lot of questions, but I'll keep my questions to 2 in the first round. So when will you know how many people actually have lost their jobs? And if you had more funding, what would you prioritize? That's my first question.
In terms of when will we know, it is a fluid process. I will tell you that in terms of timeline, I today signed the letters for the staff that will be receiving their notices. So those will likely go out on Monday. But we still don't know how many will retire, will resign because they're going on to another job. And so it will be a fluid process. Some of the information that we know, like if I had to give you a number as to where we currently are, based on, you heard me earlier say that we had about 84 vacancies already. We have about 50 to 60 certified staff that will receive a letter, which is nowhere near the 324 number that we gave you. I just want to put it in context that we have a vacancy rate, and so all of those things allow opportunities for staff to be in those positions. But we are likely to be in this space for nearly till the end of the year because we have to think about all the bumping rights that people will have. So it's not a fixed date, it is a fluid process. And I'm sorry, your second question?
If you had more funding, what would you prioritize?
Well, I think in one of the slides, we showed that we still, though the board approved our budget, it still has a 1.2 million gap. And so we would prioritize balancing the budget, followed by teachers at the high school level. We want to make sure that our students, while they will have access to advanced placement courses, we want to continue to offer as many as possible. And so that would be a priority, followed by social, emotional, behavioral supports. And that can come in 2 ways, social workers, but also clinical supports. Because we had, because of ESSER opportunities, we had clinicians, we had partners with external providers that had clinicians in our schools, and we saw that that was a benefit to students, what we call our tier 3 students that need a more intensive level of support. So that would be a priority. We would also prioritize our community schools model, though we were initially thinking that we would further reduce the allocation. Last year they were at 80%. This year, one of our initial proposals was to reduce them even more. We kept them at 80% funded, but if we were to have additional funds, we would add that to the community schools because of before school, after school program, wraparound supports for students and families. And then if we had even more money, we would prioritize early literacy, and then our student supports, student engagement specialists, behavior technicians. But if the top 2 would be high school and social emotional clinical support for students.
So my last question for the first round. So we know that enrollment continues to go down at Hartford Public Schools. Can you explain why? I hear people saying that many of our schools are half empty. Is that true? And what is the ideal size for a school?
One of the slides showed like the decrease over the years, and so that's due to not as many people are having babies as they used to, and we have the other overlay of the choice ecosystem, and so as families choose to attend magnet schools, whether those are magnet schools that are operated by CREC or LEARN or even our magnet schools, the schools in Hartford Public Schools that have a lower enrollment are our neighborhood schools, except with the exception of our high schools. So what is a healthy size? It's really hard to program for anything less than 350, 400 students. It's really hard, and by that I mean, it's hard to provide art and music and all of these other things that we want to do for students. And so, right now we have 18 schools under 350. I was actually looking to go even lower than that. Like if we have schools that are under 300 and seven neighborhood schools that are under 300 students, 2 magnets, and 3 others that are within 300 to 310. That is really hard to budget for, because even though there's less enrollment, the need of the students is still there, right? They still need the social workers. They still need an after-school program. So that becomes a challenge.
Thank you, Dr. Torres Rodriguez. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman Bilodeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you to your staff for presenting as well. My first question is, how do you plan to accomplish priority 1, high-quality teaching and learning with such a significant reduction in staff?
Yes, so we would go back to, if you can go back to the equity starter, we want to make sure that at the least we're compliant with the requirements as to class size. So those will not be compromised. What will be compromised is the fact that in the last 3 years, we were able to leverage about $50 million every year with ESSER relief funding. And we prioritized a reduction in class size, especially in K-3 and in 9th and 10th grade. And then, instructional coaches, resource teachers. And so when you pull away the COVID relief funding, it doesn't leave a lot of room to do what we were able to do through the pandemic. But the basic requirements we're going to meet, right? Students are going to have the requirements as called for by the State Department of Education.
Thank you. And the second question is, are there any positions that you currently outsource for that drive costs?
Well, we have to outsource because we have vacancies. For example, our speech and language therapies, our occupational therapists, psychologists, and so those are mandated services, and by that I mean students that have a IEP, an individualized education plan, as part of their special education support service model, and so it is what we have to resort to. When we fill the position, we pull back on outsourcing, but until then, we have to meet the needs of our students, and if we don't, whether it is through our staff or the outsourced temporary staff, we have to provide what is called compensatory services, for example, in the summertime, and so that's not ideal. It's not ideal for the student either. And so, yes, we are outsourcing, but it's because of that reason.
So just to follow up to that, so you mentioned vacancies and elimination of vacancies, and it was not a staff person. Are any of those vacancies positions that you outsource for?
No, we actually, have the line item that we pay those outsourced positions with is a staffing line. And so if we outsource for 5 positions, we still are searching. We're trying to hire for those 5. The minute we hire someone for those positions, we stop the contract. That is how the contracts are written.
Thank you.
Sure.
Majority Leader Rossetti.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Mr. Foster. I know I've said this before as the product of Hartford Public Schools and the proud daughter of a teacher. I know how hard you all work. And I'll start with, and maybe I don't understand exactly how this works, but the executive summary budget process, and, laid out very succinctly. In that process, do you meet with the administration?
Administration as to school leaders?
The city of Hartford?
No. Well, we share the information. I've had individual meetings with a few council members that have requested to discuss. I just had a meeting with the mayor to discuss our budget.
But I guess what I'm saying is, when you start the budget process, do you think, as we are collectively a team, that might be a part of the process to speak to another part of the team?
The conversations that happen at the level of the MARB. We are fully aware of what our finances look like and what the city's finances look like as we have to present collectively through the MARB.
Okay. This is a harder one to ask, but I'm just going to ask it. In your opinion, has Chef O'Neill worked to improve the education system for our Hartford students and neighborhood-based schools?
To some degree, yes. And I say that because many of our students do really well in magnet schools. So magnet schools serve some students well. When your question expands to magnet and neighborhood schools, you're talking about all of our students. And so not all of our students have access. So from that angle, I would say no, because not all of our students can access that experience. The other piece is, and you've heard me say this before, the unintended consequences, partly because of the funding structures. When over the years, special education tuition, for example, right? It's a significant amount of money when you talk about tuition at a tune collectively of $120 million. That's a quarter of our budget. And so without shifts in those foundational areas, what we're able to do for our neighborhood schools is less and less and less. So from that angle, no, it has not helped all of our students. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Councilman Gale?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to pick up on that last question and ask you how you would change the chef. How do you think that should be changed to provide a more equitable school system for Hartford?
Well, one, if we look at it through the current design, there's an element here of funding for special education reimbursement that not only applies to Hartford, but to all students across public schools across Connecticut. The reimbursement that we get is not ultimately dollar for dollar. So already, right, we have about 22% of our students that are special education students, and if they attend schools outside of Hartford, we have to pay, right, for those costs, but we don't get the full reimbursement. Like, the full reimbursement doesn't kick in after four times the amount. And so that's one thing that I would change. that's not me, right? That's a state level formula. So that's one of the first things that I would change. There is currently the tuition cap, I think I mentioned it earlier, that is capped at, 58%. I hope that remains, because if not, then we'd have to pay even more on tuition. So that's another thing that I hope, that I would change.
Let
The
me just, so I'm understanding as
Yes.
you're going along. The 58% means we would, for all of our students who go to a CREC school or another school that's not a Hartford Public School, the amount that we have to pay for them to go is capped.
would be capped. Yeah, go ahead.
Just two clarifications
And it's
on
for
that.
next year.
It's only the gen ed tuition that is capped at 58%. It doesn't cap special ed tuition or costs at all. And just to kind of highlight what that means, of the 122 million in our budget for tuition, 86 million is special education. And so it's a 58% cap on a relatively small chunk of the pie. And it also, I should also clarify, it's only gen ed magnet tuition. Right, it's not, so no special education.
So if I can just break that down for a second, I'm glad you mentioned that figure. That 80-plus million, I believe you said that, and somewhere, I think we have it in materials, as to the cost for a regular student and the reimbursement for a special ed student, you don't get reimbursed until it's 4.5 times? Is that correct?
It is correct. So when the cost for an individual special education student exceed 4.5 times our average per pupil cost, we're supposed to get that fully reimbursed from the state.
So
That's
let's
also
just stop there for a second and just, let's put some numbers on it.
okay.
Go ahead.
Give me is it 18,000 per student? What is the number for your cost for your average student?
So for us, the 4.5 times is about $100,000. So when the cost for one student exceeds 100,000, that's when the state steps in. But I just wanted to add one qualifier. That excess cost grant is subject to appropriation, and this year it's appropriated at 72%. So we don't, right, once the costs exceed 100,000, we get 72% of the costs over and above 100,000.
How many students do we have that are costing us at that level? In other words, if we, here's the real question. If equity was to prevail and we were able to convince the legislature that there should be we should get even funding, how much would we end up saving if we just spent the same amount for every kid regardless of their special education needs? Am I making the question clear?
Yes, we can get the number for you, but I'll maybe share another figure that might address what you're asking. We have in-district special education programs that we've been able to build over the years. If we didn't have those programs save us $30 million. Does that, it sort of answers your question, right? If we had to outplace for all of those students, that's a significant amount of money. Because we need to be reimbursed, not just for students that go out to magnets, but we need to get reimbursed for our own students as well.
Yeah, I'm focusing on your $122 million
Yes.
number, right?
Yeah.
And trying to figure out, what is a number that would be more representative? You did have some figures in here as to what other, the Connecticut's, let's see, Hartford Public Schools spend 17% of its budget on special education. Other schools spend 6%. That's the statewide average. So 6 to 17%, that's a pretty significant difference. What does that mean in dollars?
We can get the number as to how many are special education and those that are outplaced, because the big ticket items, for lack of a better word, are students that are outplaced at the tune of, $80,000 to $150,000.
You want me to give some?
So we're just trying to clarify up here, so we're understanding that. So we're all understanding. This is kids that we're paying to go to some other school.
Yes.
That 122 million.
A specialized school, not to go to,
No, it's CREC. Includes CREC or not?
We're
Well,
talking about special ed, right?
yeah, special education.
So when you say specialized school, I'm sorry to interrupt, but just to
No, go ahead.
When you
I wanna
say kids
clarify.
we're sending to specialized school, you're talking about like Van Brons or ACES or one of those kind of schools.
Because the 120, can you just clarify the 120, then the 86 million, And then we have some numbers for Councilman Gale that we just found some numbers for you.
Yeah, so as of now, our FY22 is about 122 million total in tuition. In FY25 budget, it's 122 million in tuition, of which 86 million is special education tuition. I just want to be clear, though, that's separate. I might have confused things with the excess cost piece, right? So when we talk about what that 86 million is composed of, is we get direct billed. So if a student goes to a CREC or other magnet operator school, or to an open choice school, student goes to Glastonbury, Bloomfield through the open choice program, and in their IEP, it says they need 3 hours of time with a social worker weekly. We pay that at an hourly rate. So we're billed, and whatever that hourly rate is, which is some upwards of, I think, $120, we pay that 3 hours, $120 per hour for that student, because that's what it says in the IEP. That's where the 86 million comes from. Just to give you some numbers on the
And
excess.
we don't get to sit in that IEP and determine if that's what that kid really needs.
Well, there's two.
Oh, go
Sorry.
ahead. Go.
There's two different versions, right?
Sorry.
So if it's a magnet school,
Yes.
we do sit in the IEP. If it's an open choice seat, we don't. But just to be, we sit in the room. So for example, if a student is at a CREC school, we have a staff member who goes to the PPT meetings where the IEP is determined. But you have to think about sort of what is the level of influence and control, right? Because in that PPT meeting, you have the staff from CREC who are recommending a certain set of services. You have the parents who have to sign off on the IEP. So it doesn't put our staff in a great position to say, no, we're not going to do that. I mean, we do push back where the data supports pushing back, but obviously it's a setting where ultimately the IEP has to be agreed to with the consent of the parent.
And I don't think anybody up here would want to deny a kid the appropriate IEP.
No.
But we would want to make sure that the city of Hartford isn't tasked with paying more than its fair share vis-à-vis the rest of the state of Connecticut.
Yes.
And I will say, just for the record, that we have in the past several years done our due diligence in really scrutinizing all of the bills that have come our way.
It would be helpful if you at some point could get to us what you think a number would be if we were paying more along the lines of the state average of 6%, what that savings would be to your budget.
Understood. I can also give you some answers on the excess cost grant. So this is for this current fiscal year. So we have 250 students who exceed the 4.5 times threshold. 250
who are
students.
above 100,000?
Yes, and the total cost, the total cost of tuition plus transportation for that 250 students is $34 million. That's
'Cause
about 136,000 per
Well,
student.
so you can almost do the math right there. 250 students, multiply it times what's your average per student, 20,000?
Could be. I mean, there are some students that have really complex individualized plans. So it's the tuition, and then there's the door-to-door transportation as well.
Thank you.
Councilman Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Torres. Just to follow up on that, to be clear, when we send this, let's say we send this, that reimbursement that we pay for special ed services is on top. It's on top of whatever tuition we pay for choice. In other words, suppose we had a student here who through choice goes to Hall High School in West Hartford. And then at Hall, so we're paying Hall, we're paying West Hartford money for that, the whole tuition. And then on top of that, if they need special services, we're paying for that also.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that point,
Magnet or open choice?
if it were open choice.
Magnet we do, open choice we don't.
Okay, gotcha. So, now to my actual question I wanted
Yeah.
to ask. Coming back to the positions that are being taken away in this budget, and I include the absences, because presumably the absences are positions we think we need if we could but fill them, right? So coming back to that, what is the cost of just the in-school positions that are being cut? In other words, if we wanted to save all those positions, including the ones that are absentee positions, that 6% you talked about, how much would that cost?
Follow-up, clarifying question, non-ESSER positions? Because the.
Right,
Okay,
Yes,
so the
the
non-SRO, if you
the
could go to the
ones
non-
that, but for the pandemic, we still would
If you
have.
could- So at $100,000 each person.
That's roughly 100,000 in salary and benefits per position.
That, like, that's, if I just want to run the numbers, I
Yes.
can just take the number times
Yeah.
100,000, and that's about what it costs.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then going sort of more to Councilwoman Rossetti's question about, I think she's essentially, how would you fix chef? This is a little more specific. We have this problem, which is a structural problem, that we have to pay all this money out. What would happen, and maybe you don't know, because I certainly don't know, no one I've asked knows, what would happen if we just stopped paying?
I w-
desperate times call for desperate measures, you feel
Well,
me?
we have an example of what has happened, where we were doing our due diligence as to residency requirements and verifying residency for students that, Hartford residents attending schools, magnet school, right, operated by others. And so we said we will not pay until that is fully confirmed. And we actually did that for several years. We really, at the direction of the board, it was superintendent, stay on it. And the state withheld the money from us. The state said, fine, then we will hold your money.
Let me understand. In other
The-
words,
the
what we would have been paying to another district.
The money that was coming to the state, to us, to the city, as a pass-through to us, was held. So after some additional clarifying, the money went directly to the magnet operator.
So they're going to get us either way, is what you're telling me. All right, I'll pass till the next round. Thank
Do
you.
you want to,
Councilman Thomas.
1 point what?
Thank you, Dr. Torres. Yeah.
And just to give a little more color to that, 1.1 million was the figure in that example that I just gave you.
Thank you for your presentation. I think for me, I think I probably only am going to have one question. So it seems like things are not well, and it hasn't been well for some time. And my question more so is like, at what point do you think is like the breaking point, or like how bad are things going to continue to get? Like what, in your opinion, how does Hartford Public Schools look in 5 years, or 10 years, or 15 years? Like, are these things that are going to continue, like, you know, is enrollment going to continue to go down? Is tuition going to just continue to go up? And what needs to happen to fix it to where, you know, everyone's happy?
So that is not one question, I just
Yeah, I'm
want to
so
say.
sorry. And I know it's a big question.
So in terms of the predictions, and I think some of you were on the council several years ago when I've made the presentation and said, we've made the projections. The reason why we're here today versus 3 years ago is because we had an influx, a significant amount of federal relief funding. So the projections, we would have been in this place a few years ago. However, right, it was delayed because of the infusion of funding. The projections were made because of the last agreement, the last chef agreement that says there are a certain amount of seats will continue to be available. And so we're going to continue to be in this space. And I want to clarify, I am not pointing any fingers. It is the context that we're operating under. Right, like it is the ecosystem that we have, and do I see that enrollment in the city is gonna? Do I think more people in the city are gonna have babies? I don't know. I think there's only like 5 municipalities in Connecticut that are going in the opposite direction, and everyone else is decreasing in their enrollment, in their birth rates. So I don't foresee that happening. Perhaps after 5-10 years from now, maybe. What could happen? I think that Well, we have, like I said, at least 7 schools that are under 250 students. Like, that is a serious conversation that we have to happen. Is that gonna net us a significant amount of money? The last time that we closed and consolidated schools, it was about $11 million that we were able to get back. So there are some savings, but that's one way to go at it. But then we have to think about the offerings. If we're still operating within the same choice system, we have to attract students, and our students, other students outside of Connecticut are telling us that the school experience needs to change. It's not just the Hartford experience, right? Students are saying they want more career opportunities. Students are saying they want to learn things that are connected to what they're going to do in life. They don't want to wait to leave high school to learn and explore those things. So I think that's part of what has to happen if we want to attract, well, one, if we want to keep our students, and two, if we want to attract other students. That is assuming that is within the same design, the choice design that we have. That's one, something that has to happen. I think we also have to think about, well, not think about, like, there has to be a solution to the funding structures, which I think is, Councilman Gale's question earlier. That is certainly beyond my control and the council's control, right? When we think about the state funding formulas. It wasn't a one question and it wasn't a one
Yeah.
answer.
No, but thank you so much for
Yeah.
taking a swing at it. I appreciate it.
All right. Let me start with the 122. Let me start on that one. That was not my first question, but I'm gonna just follow up on that since we touched that already. So I heard that, correct me if I'm wrong, did you say that the average hourly rate for SPED is $120? For the, out of the district, when you get the billing, is that an average number?
Yeah, that's close. I don't know if I've got it precisely right, because there's a rate for school psychologists, there's a rate for speech language, there's a rate for social work. So, yeah, but there's an hourly rate table for each of the services.
Okay, but then removing the psychology and social work, the SPED tuition, it's at 100, 120, is it like in that range up there?
For an outplacement?
Yeah,
For an outplacement student?
yes.
It could be anywhere from 80 to 80 to 120
Would you
annually.
would you consider that excessive?
Do we consider it excessive? I think it depends on the complexity of the IEP, right? Not all individualized education plans are the same.
Sure, but they're gonna charge you that much regardless of the IP. If the student is placed there, if whether it's the student has complexities, the one you're referring to, or not, if the student is placed in that same school, in that same place, they're gonna charge you the same rate.
Yes, and I know that there have been conversations at the state level and at the legislature about additional controls and accountabilities to these entities around their price ranges. But I don't think much has been resolved.
Okay, so now I think I'm gonna ask more than two questions, so my apologies. This is just follow up on these. So you as the client paying for these services, do you feel that you have the right to say, I'd like to audit your records of my students, the financial records, and verify that not only the demands or the mandatory requirements are being met, but also that the data it's being collected properly, and do some sort of audit, the same kind of audit that the state does for special ed, for the school districts and any other entity that you subcontract with. But you as a district, do you feel that you have the right to do that?
Yes, specifically through the IEP process, right? When we're able to check whether or not that IEP has been implemented with fidelity. If you're asking about the cost structure after that assessment is done, I think that's where things get tricky, right? Because if there isn't fidelity to the program, we could say, well, then we're not going to pay you, right? But even if there was fidelity and they want to charge us $180,000, we could say no and find another placement. But there's really, as I understand it, very little oversight for those private facilities.
And that's where I wanted to get to.
Got it.
I wanted to get to that point where that conversation rises a little bit, to that level, where I've seen many reports of that the State Department, Education Department, has done audits to many of these entities and the agencies that are being subcontracted by different districts, and in every single one of them, they find many violations, many. One in Hartford, they found 20, not one under your purview, 20 violations, and it caught my attention. So I kept looking, and I kept finding that was very common, and it hit me and it surprised me that we, the district, or the city of Hartford, the district, is paying for a service that's not up to the quality of the cost that we're paying for. So we're paying $80, $100 per hour. I expect to get a Cadillac. I expect to get that kind of service. But if we don't have the ability to necessarily audit the data, not just through the IEP, as you mentioned, I understand that, but that's one level. It doesn't go as deep as it should go to really see exactly if the work is being done on a day-to-day basis, is the data is being captured properly, and I don't know that the district has even the capacity to do that, because that requires staffing, that requires more, and I get that part. But I think that there is a little bit of a gap there, and it concerns me that we're paying so much and we are not able to see exactly how that money is being spent and how that money is being invested in our children. So that was one last statement on that particular question. Moving away from the 122, do you know where the other post-employment benefits, OPEB, how do you pay for that? Meaning like teachers that have retired, those benefits like health insurance and so, from where in the budget that money comes from?
You can.
Yeah, so the way we do that is we take all of the various fringe costs, so the health insurance costs, workers' compensation, OPEB, MRF, and we run a calculation each year to determine essentially a fringe rate. And we have a split fringe rate. We have a fringe rate for certified staff who are part of the Connecticut Teachers Retirement System, and then we have a separate fringe rate for non-certified staff who are part of other retirement programs. And so in our budget, you'll see certified and non-certified fringe. And essentially the way we're determining that is we're taking that rate and applying it to the salaries across the certified and the non-certified positions. And then all of the fringe costs that we have to pay out come from those fringe line items.
Okay, so it's in the budget.
It is.
Okay. So then this is my last question, because then I'm gonna start getting some looks. This is my last question on the first round. So the Office of the Treasurer gave us some different data that we acquired for different departments, and one of them that caught my attention was the OPEB fund that sits right now at the Office of the Treasurer that has $27 million there. That's specifically for OPEB, only specifically for other post-employment benefits. And the last time that money has been tapped into or invoices have been sent to the Office of the Treasurer to be used is about 2 years ago. So I want to understand exactly how that process works so we can have that conversation. So if there is some funding there for those particular benefits that hasn't been touched in a while, you budget for this in the budget. How does that work? Because that fund is outside of your budget. Do you use that money? Do you intend to use that fund that's sitting there? And if not, then why are we not using those funds to pay for these benefits, for post-employment benefits?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the question. So we do, so there is the OPEB trust, and I think, I'm not going to get this number precisely right, but I think the last time the actuaries looked at it, it was about 90% funded in terms of funding our future liabilities. And so we could draw on that trust in order to pay current year liabilities, but we would be bringing down that percentage to which the future liabilities are funded. So that would be a choice we could make. I will also say, right, because it's other than pension employment benefits for a select set of our population, even paying the current year OPEB expenses, it's not a huge chunk of our fringe budget. So just to expand on that, I mean, from an accounting or an actuarial standpoint, we'd be, tapping into funds that are meant to pay future liabilities.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so Council President Surgeon.
Good evening, and thank you so very much for your presentation. I had sit back and listened a lot because I am not in the education field at all. So this, when I met with the superintendent, as I said to her, this is like a learning curve for me, a huge one. So bear with me because I'm probably going to ask questions which, oh, she should know this. Do not. So a couple of things. In your presentation, you talked about outsourcing for psychology help, special education help. But yet still, when I looked at your budget under like psychological services, special education, is that part of the outsourcing? And so do you still budget for it in the budget, even though you're paying for the outsourcing of it?
The outsourcing for the positions are in our salary line. If we have something else that says psychological services, we also have people that do psychological testing for some of our students that we have to pay for. For example, those students that are in the in other that need an initial evaluation, for example, we have to pay for that as well. So those would fall under psychological services.
Yeah, because in your budget, you had about 21 position under Department of Psychological Services. So I would say that is...
So we have those, and then we have the ones that we need to outsource because we don't have psychologists.
So, all right, so this service of so Department of Psychological Service are for in-school testing, student testing?
Testing and supports that they need. They might have an IEP, and they might need to go to the school psychologist once a week, for example.
Okay, all right, I'm getting that, all right. So, out of the 21 budgeted person, how many of that are, associated with the in-school students, and if there's any outsourcing in those 21 positions? Because I believe you said even though you may outsource, you still budget for that position because you may want to hire someone later on.
No, it's in our salary line.
Okay, so it's
That salary for the psychologist,
yeah, what says no, Department of Psychology Services, and it's budgeted for about 21 people. It's certified, 21 position, for about 2.2 million.
yes. So if those are not full, if those are not all filled, we use some of that money and then move it to our salary line to pay for the salaries to the contracted, the outsourced vendor.
Okay, so then my budget question to you then is, out of the 21 position, how many is actually truly in your department, and how many is actually budgeted outsourced?
I will have to get you the
I know.
information,
Yes,
but
that's fine.
I can get the information for that one and all the others that we outsource.
Great.
Yep.
And again, I'm the type of person which I just look at people's budget and ask. You had budgeted for transitional secondary for about 3.6 million. What is that?
In terms of our transitionary supports, we are required by federal law to provide special education students, or education in general, for students under the special education umbrella until the age of 22. And so we have transitional services for students. We have a program at Hartford High, actually, that is called the STEP program that we provide for students.
So how many students do you provide this transitional, and I presume that's different from your special education budget? I'm sorry.
No, they're still special education students, but they're a different program.
So how many students are those?
I'll have to get you the
Okay.
information. We
All
might be able to find it as we're
That's
talking.
fine. If you don't have it tonight, you can always send it to me.
Absolutely.
I'm good with that. I'm just trying to understand the department and how it's budgeted. I do see where in your safety and security, you increase that by the 8 people, and you mentioned that in your budget presentation. It seems to me that everything is compartmentalized. And bear with me because I don't understand education, and I know it doesn't make any sense to you. It makes sense to you, it doesn't make any sense to me. So please bear with me. So you have a Department of College and Career Readiness. You have a Teaching and Learning. You have academics. You have performance and accessibility. Isn't that all, isn't that all interrelated?
Yes, a lot of it is interrelated, but those are very different duties and responsibilities. Some are certified, some are not certified.
I love you people. That's why I didn't become a teacher. This is great. Okay, because when I looked through the budget, I saw that, I'm probably going to be yelled at because I'm going over my, wait a second, the academics department, what is that? We budgeted for, I don't understand, because you budgeted for about 25 positions. There's an operating expense of about 4.5 million for a total of $7 million for Office of Academics. Please help me on this.
Yeah, you can. Just explain the whole.
Yeah, so
Non-staff.
what's in the Office of Academics budget, so relative to positions, what you're talking about there are individuals who have oversight of particular content areas, so over ELA, social studies, science, math. So they're responsible for those curricula and supporting schools with professional learning and implementation of curricula. In terms of the dollars in the Office of Academics budget, they do have a larger sort of non-position budget than many other central office departments. That's because all of the costs of curriculum live in that department's budget.
So for example, our consumables, students that, we have a new curriculum and they need books, workbooks, for example, right? So all of that would fall into those categories.
Okay, so then another budget question is the content area that this Office of Academics cover. Could you tell me, you have 25 positions, could you tell me what content area this covers, and also of the $4.5 million of operating expenses, could you tell me what they're utilized, or what are you buying up? What are you buying?
Yes, so I can give you some examples there where
Sure.
you see in instructional other supplies, that's where some of the consumables that I just spoke about. If we need to buy science kits for some students, for example, workbooks, we would put it under there. We have where you see communications. We have, I don't know if you've heard the word intervention supports, and some of our students have computer-based programs, and so we need to buy licensing and software for students to access their intervention supports. So that would go under there. In terms of your question relative to the content areas, we have all of the content areas, our English language arts, which is like literacy, we have early childhood, we have math, science, technology, STEM, art, bilingual education, multilingual education, what is it? World languages. You're shaking your head like, too much, too many, but...
No, it's not too much, too many. It's just I guess for me, is I'm trying to understand how this relates to the actual, in your budget you talk about, the central office actually helps service the kids. And I'm trying to understand how this relates to the servicing our children. I do understand the buying of supplies is needed. But, the different content of what you're presenting, do I need 25 people to do this content, for a 16,000, school system? And that's what I'm trying to interrelate myself where, there's 340, in your presentation, 340 people in central office and about 2,800 professional staffing and certified and non-certified throughout. It's like a 7-to-1 balance for me, and I'm trying to understand how that balance work for me trying to understand this.
Yes, and perhaps I can expand a little bit. So we have, for example, curriculum specialists that support specifically for, we are rolling out as part of the waiver that we got from the state for early literacy. We have a completely new curriculum that's rolling out for K through third grade next year across all of our schools. And so it's new curriculum, so we have to support our teachers with the new curriculum. We have to support our school leaders that are going to then support our school teachers in their schools. And so we need staff to support with that. It's not a one-time support, right? We have to offer that throughout the year. We have another example, the secondary curriculum, which we saw this year in our English language arts curriculum. And so we needed to have staff to support with that rollout. And we have what we call learning walks. That is team members that work with school staff, school leaders and staff to go visit classrooms and see whether a teacher is needing any support to implement the curriculum. And so it is support that is provided. It sits at the central office, but it happens across our schools. And so the reason why, we can't have the same person do it across all content areas is because we have different certifications, right? There are people that are certified in elementary, people that are certified in world language differently. And so it's not necessarily a content area that all of them could, have the background in.
Just one last question, Mr. Chair. And in the Office of Special Education, you have about 47 and a half staff. How many of those staff attend the IEP or PPP, whatever what do you call it, on a daily and monthly basis? Because some of the concerns that I've heard that you have also mentioned in your presentation is between the choice and the magnet school, magnet school you can go, the open choice you don't. So you have 47 people in that budget. How many, another budget question, if you can tell me how often they attend these IEPs, you know, for the three, how many number of kids we have out, goes out of the system?
I think, wait, is it 6 out-of-district specialists? I think it's either 5 or 6 out-of-district specialists that we have, and they attend all of the magnet school-based PPTs. We are not able to do that for open choice.
But you have 47 positions in Office of Special Education.
So there's also other positions. There are directors of special education. There are compliance team members that are there to ensure, and these are required by law, to ensure that we are monitoring and providing services to students. There are folks there that help us with billing, right? You heard me earlier say that we have to make sure that all of the billing is accurate. So all of those folks are in that special education department.
Okay. So what I'll do is, I wanted to just send you a bunch of questions
Great.
regarding these 25, 26 departments, and you can tell me how many people they are and their specification and what they do. That'll make life easier.
Great.
Thank you, Sir Chair.
Thank you. We're gonna kick off round 2. I'm gonna deviate a little bit from my protocol, and I'm gonna ask one question before I open up the floor, because if I don't ask the question now, I'm gonna forget exactly, because I've been thinking about it for the last 15 minutes. So let's go back to the school choice, open choice program, which apparently is giving so much headache as far as the unintended consequences and the how it's playing out fiscally. So the seats that are appropriated or allocated for school choice program uses a formula that's set by the state, and this formula includes, different factors, I guess, socioeconomic status, residency. There's different factors that are taken into account. So then the allocation of the seats, it's already imposed by this formula. Before I finalize the question, do you think that formula that's set by the state right now accomplishes the goal that it was intended to accomplish?
Well, if we measure it by the amount of seats that are open, no.
Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned that, because then the next part of the question will be, because of the way that the formula is allocated or set, my understanding, and please clarify this and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that applicants oftentimes get sent to a waiting list, or they get sent to another operator, because the seats that are available within the Hartford magnet school system are not necessarily allocated for that particular applicant based on the different demographics and all the other factors. So eventually those seats they left on field, which, and this is the part that's important to me, any seat that's on field, and now you cannot fill it in with nobody else because it's already allocated based on this formula, that's less revenue for the school district, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So with that being said, then I can clearly say that it's not working out. It's working out maybe in other aspect, but it's not working out holistically, because then you have a school that you have, let's say, 20 seats available that you cannot fill, even though there are many applicants waiting in the waiting list, ready to come to school, ready to join any Hartford magnet school, but the formula doesn't allow them. And then now you have the teaching there, you have the capacity to teach these students, and the seats are on field, and there's nothing you could do about it. Is that correct?
Yes, and in some cases, we don't have the capacity because we won't hire the staff.
If you don't
because
have
we
the revenue.
money.
If
Yes.
you don't have the revenue.
Or if we do, we come to October, November, after all, right, after all the state counts, and we realize that there are classes that are under-enrolled, and then we have to engage in what we call our internal class size balancing, which adds a level of disruption
But then if you have, for example, in high school, you have the ratio of 1 teacher to 21 students, and you happen to have, you have to hire a teacher for the next segment of 21 students, but you only have 10, but you gotta hire a teacher because you cannot allocate more students than the 21 per teacher. You still have 11 seats that you could have filled, more revenue coming in, not having to hire any more teachers because you already had the teacher there. That does happen, right?
Yeah, but we don't carry it throughout the year, that's when we get into the class size reductions. Because we can't go and on the magnet school side and say, oh, we're gonna hope to get more kids, because they're not coming. They're not coming after October 1st. That's the case on the non-magnet side, in the neighborhoods, but they keep coming all the time.
Okay. How many on-field seats you have that, if the formula was a little more flexible, you could have filled?
I will get you the number. I can get you the number. I don't have it right now, but I will get you the number across all of our schools.
All right. Thank you. I'm opening the floor. Councilwoman Rosado.
Hello again. I have many questions, but, so I wanted to piggyback off Council President a little bit, because, there's always the talk of central office has too many employees or too much staffing, right? And so I heard you say a lot of times that, state mandated. Would you be able to provide me with a list of how many positions in central office are state mandated?
Yes, we could do that.
Okay. And then my other question is, and I don't know if you talked about this before, I was running late today, but have you explored grant opportunities? Do you have someone in the district dedicated to helping figure out, what partners can support with fundings or with giving their time, like volunteering or providing training or work studies to students?
We have a part-time grant writer. I don't know if that's what you're asking, if you're saying someone is dedicated to like finding
Yes.
money. No, we don't have anyone dedicated for that. What I will say is that I think it was 2 years ago that we tried, we did all the research and looked at other districts in Connecticut and beyond that had foundations to present to the board, almost, anticipating that we would be in this space and saying, we have 2 more years of ESSER funding. Let's think about establishing the Hartford Public Schools Education Foundation. We didn't move forward, the board didn't move forward with that. So I'm hopeful that we can explore it again. And as part of the realignment that we're doing in the Office of Family and Community Partnerships, we are introducing we need that capacity in that office. We don't have anyone that identifies. You're not using the word fund development, but I kind of hear fund development in your question. It is not an area, we don't have capacity there, but we need to have capacity for a district our size, not only in terms of money, but I also heard your comment or your question about what else can partners provide.
Correct.
And opportunities for young people. Yeah, that is a gap that we have, and we're trying to mitigate that gap.
Okay. And so the other day, some of the members of this body met with the board chair from the BOE, and we had a conversation with him, and I'm going to ask you the question. I wish you were at that meeting. So 2 things, and then I'll finish my questions. I heard that the Hartford Public School now catered to young women that were pregnant, because before it was very hard for them to get the education. Could you talk a little bit about that? And my other question is, and this is one that I'm not going to let go, is the Travelers Insurance Company gave a grant called Paso a Paso, so that you, the superintendent, could go to Puerto Rico and bring back teachers. Now, Could you also talk about that? Where is that money now? And we're laying off teachers, right? But we have a grant to bring teachers in. When is that going to happen?
So your first question around, I'm not sure what the board chair mentioned in the meeting, but we recently reopened the Little Owls program at Hartford High, which is a early child care center for our teen parents. That was one of the barriers that we had identified, especially during the pandemic, as to like when we talk about the root causes that are keeping some of our young people from coming to school. Lack of access to childcare was one, and so we had the opportunity, and we worked with, some of our team members, and we now have a high quality childcare center for students. And though it's located at Hartford High, it is available to students across our entire district. We provide transportation for the teen parent and the baby, the child, and then transport the student to their actual school. So yeah, that's something that's available to our students. Your question about the Travelers, so Travelers is supporting with a portion of the Paso a Paso program. There are specific stipends, for example, to help teachers that relocate here, and so that's funding that is set aside. We're waiting now. While I didn't go to do the recruitment, we had a staff member that did go, and they identified qualified and interested applicants. And so we're waiting to see how all of our staff reductions play out. And we're also in conversations with our union to partner to make that happen.
Okay, Superintendent, but I'm confused as if this is a grant from the Travelers, why would you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you're waiting to see how the staffing works out with the union when we need teachers and there's a grant? Because
we have to wait for all of the reductions in force to play out, given given the reductions that we're making. Say there is a vacancy that we have in a third grade bilingual teacher, but we reduced a third grade bilingual teacher already in Hartford Public Schools. That person, per contractual agreements, has a right to that position first. And so the individual that's been recruited will have to wait. So we have to wait for all of these shifts to happen before we can offer the position to someone else.
Okay, but don't we have a big shortage with teachers?
We do, but we have, yes, and we're trying to kind of mitigate the shortages that we have with the now reductions that we're making because of the budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilwoman Bilodeau.
Just a simple question. How many Hartford magnet schools versus Hartford Public Schools?
18 magnets.
Thank you.
We have 39 schools, and 2 of those are alternative programs. And 2 additional alternative programs.
Thank you.
Majority Leader Rossetti.
Thank you. I want to go back to the budget book, 32-1, Priority 1, high-quality teaching and learning, high-quality instruction and support to ensure students graduate ready for life, college, career, and success. What is our present graduation rate?
We are at 73.7, I believe. It's we were at 68% when I came to the district. I do think we're going to see an increase, but I'm actually not going to share that yet because it hasn't been certified.
What has it been? Do you know what the last 5 years have been?
Hang on one second. We actually just, I do know that when I came into the district, it was at 68%. That I know. Hang on a second. Do we have it? 68.8%. We are at 73.8, not 73.7.
But what has it been every year for the last 5 years? Do you have those numbers?
68, 70, 72, decreased to 68 at the onset of the pandemic, 72, 73.8.
And of those graduating, how many go on to college?
We can get you that number. However, the last time that we did that deep analysis, we had 50% that went on to college, and then in year 2, 33% of those were persisting in year 2. You're not asking about the persistence, but it is the last time that we did the deeper dive. That is at the 4-year, in 4-year institutions. The data were lower for 2-year community college institutions.
And understanding that college isn't, you know, the win-all, but certainly there's many careers that aren't that. But, so my second question, if you go to your district priorities and initiatives in your presentation, and I can't tell you the page because there's no numbers on the page. High-quality instruction, Tier 1. You spoke to supporting career pathways and bullet maintaining alternative learning pathways. Can you explain to me the difference and why that's important?
Sure. So our pathways are at our comprehensive high schools. Comprehensive high schools are Hartford High, Weaver, and Buckley. And we have 7 pathways that students can explore these pathways right at the end of 9th grade and then begin to progress and have opportunities to work with industry experts as well as take courses. Oftentimes they get college credit for those courses that are focused in that pathway.
Like
Example,
what kind of industry?
Example, allied health is one. We have engineering and green technology at Hartford High. We have insurance, business, and finance at Weaver High School. We have IT at Buckley. We have the public service that focuses on teaching and public safety. And so those are the pathways. And then you alternative pathways, you asked? Or yes,
Alternative learning pathways.
So under that umbrella, we have several. One is our partnership with OPP, our piece of the pie, and making sure that some of the students that were not being successful for whatever the reason is, that they're able to access OPP for an educational experience there. We also have our Hope Academies. Hope Academies are located currently at 2 Boys and Girls Club sites, and they provide a lot of support, what we call wraparound support, social emotional support for our students in a smaller setting so that they can stay on track. And so those are very unique pathways and alternative programs because they're not in what we call the regular education setting, if you will.
Is the graduation rate comparable with career pathways to alternative learning pathways?
We actually looked at that data, and students that are part of a pathway actually have a higher graduation rate.
Which pathway?
All of the pathways.
Okay.
Than those that are not, because not all of our students are connected to a pathway. We're working toward having more pathways at the high school level.
How many students aren't connected to a pathways?
I don't
And
know
why
that.
would they not be?
But I don't have the number now. I do know that 700 ninth graders like declared into a pathway, but I can get you the number.
And why wouldn't we just have all of them go into a pathway?
The great question. It is a capacity issue, right? When students go into a pathway, that means that we have to have added staff, that, for example, are going to teach the engineering class, that they're going to teach the instructional technology class, and so we have to hire additional teachers with specific certifications to teach those credits.
So let me get this straight. If you're not in a path, so everybody starts here, and in theory, if you didn't do a pathway, you just get this. And then if you get this, and then you may get a pathway.
Yes, and for
What
this.
if you want a pathway, are you turned down?
If usually, I haven't heard of any student being turned down, but where we might have difficulty is if a student wants to be in a pathway and wants to take a class and the class is full. For example, we haven't had this, but if there's a student, there's a high interest around our CNA, which by the way is very popular, our CNA courses, then we would have to figure out how else that student would be able to get in.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Superintendent.
Sure.
Council President Surgeon.
Thank you. I'm gonna try to play our Assistant Majority Leader since he's not here. And I would ask the question, what service would you recommend to share with the city of Hartford, like how we do our MHIS sharing, that will help budgetary-wise?
Yeah, we've talked about that. We've actually explored that years ago. I think the only one that we wondered about was around like the processing of like billing. That's not the appropriate. What's the appropriate terminology? Purchasing. Purchasing was one that we wondered about. We initially thought about, could there be an opportunity around like HR, but given all of the certifications and all of the interaction that we have to have with the State Department of Education, we thought that's not going to work. But that is a place where we can start. Printing, do we share printing? We already shared. Do you share printing? We don't share printing. Printing could be another one that we could, I don't know how much printing services you require, but that's a potential other one that we could explore.
Because when I look at, you had 39 buildings, okay? You have so many people for building and grounds. When I look at that in your budget, I'm like, good location to actually think of sharing, because you're spending, you have about 36 staff, and between salary and compensation, you're about 8.7 million. So
We could explore, absolutely.
that's the next something to really explore and really consider, and as we go into the next years of how we actually work together more than anything else. We're the same city, we're one city, and if some things can be passed on to the city so we can save our kids, it's worth having a conversation. So thank you for that answer. And the only one last question, Sir Chair, and that is your transportation. You have about 4 people in your transportation budget. And this is where, you spend for operating expense about 29 million.
Yes.
So I can speak to that. So our transportation, the 4 people, it's actually a very lean staff for a transportation.
No, it wasn't the staff salary, it's the,
They're doing all
it's
the
your total
routing.
operating expense.
Right, so the operating expense, our transportation is entirely contracted out. So we do an RFP, we contract, and there's a private company that is doing all of our transportation services, right? So buses, vans, big buses, little buses. So the 29 million is essentially the cost of contracting out for the transportation services.
Could you, another budget question, could you send a list of services that you contract out, list of companies that you have a contract with for the transportation?
Yeah, what I will say on that, yeah, we can. What I will say is actually we are in the RFP process at this moment. We had to go out to RFP this year, and so I don't think we've selected the vendor for next year yet.
All right, but whatever one you have currently,
Yes.
Would
Okay.
be a huge help, because you're doing 3,000 to 4,000 kids transporting yearly, and how many towns do you transport to? And the names of the towns you transport to?
We can get you that information. Now, I will say that some of the transportation that is provided for students to come into Hartford is provided by CREC.
But do you pay them, or we?
The state does, as part of the choice
All
system.
right, so explain that to me, I'm sorry. If the creek comes into town? No,
Students, non-Hartford resident students
non-Hartford residents.
that are transported to Hartford are transported by CREC as part of the contract with the state. Our contract that you were just referencing, right, for our students that attend our schools.
So they pay for the student to come into town, and we have to pay for the kids, our kids, to go out of town.
No,
No?
well, for general ed students going to magnet schools from Hartford to other magnet, CREC is doing the transportation for that as well, paid for by the state.
It's a state contract.
The lion's share, not to go back to the earlier topic, the lion's share of that 29 million is special education transportation for students who have door-to-door transportation written to their IEP.
That we pay for.
I think our regular ed transportation is, I can get you a more precise number, but it's less than 6 million of that total.
Okay.
I mean, door-to-door transportation is highly costly, high costly.
So, all right, maybe I'm limited.
No.
No. 6 million of this go to, wow. All right, I think I'll stop asking.
And the only contract that we have, by the way, is with Autumn Transportation,
Wow.
currently.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so very much.
All right, Councilman Gale.
On that, have you ever looked at bringing that in-house?
Oh, wow. Not since I've been here. I think I initially asked at one point, and I think it was like a capacity issue. No, we have not. I mean, we would have to buy a fleet of buses and all that good stuff. We could look into it.
Along the lines of looking into it, you talked about capacity, you talked about the ability to provide, the extras for students, to give them a full educational experience, and the fact that in some cases in this budget, we're going to be cutting music, for instance, and library and art, maybe sports in some cases. But you mentioned that when the school is a bigger school, it's easier to provide those things. And the fact that we have I forget your number, but it seemed to me it was a rather astounding number of very small schools where this is exactly part of the problem, it sounds like. So it rather begs the question as to who's going to start that conversation to reduce some of these schools or to consolidate one school into another. And I'm thinking, we have these buildings. Hartford High, if I look at your figures, has 800 plus students in it. The building was probably built for 3,000 students, so we're pretty way under capacity for that school. I think you have a couple of programs at MLK. MLK has 200 students in it, so it looks as though we got a lot of. When are we going to start that conversation?
I will say that I just recently received a request from our board chair asking for an analysis of the current enrollment and capacity. It was one of the themes that resonated throughout all of our community sessions that we did as part of this budget, which has not been the case in previous years. I think there was not one community session that we went to in which that talk, what you just said was raised. So I will be putting together that report for our board chair. And I hear you, right? The economies
Well,
of
but
scale.
and I also understand, I mean, these are tough decisions.
The
because
economies of scale are
The
hard.
neighborhood that you're gonna the school you're gonna close in any neighborhood, nobody wants to see their school closed, but oftentimes I think people may not recognize that they're not getting the best bang for their buck when they don't have an art teacher and they don't have a music teacher and they don't have all of the other services that can be provided with the economies of scale. And, you know, in talking about the pathway programs that were mentioned earlier, a bigger high school, you know, you have the ability to have all those courses you talked about. You have the ability to have AP courses.
Yes.
And provide more courses if you have 1,000 students as opposed to 300 in a high school.
I'm with you. I'll tell you, as I look at the numbers, we have 9 schools now that are under 300. 9.
Those are all elementary?
7 of those are, well, 2 are middle schools, and 5 are elementaries. And yeah, it becomes really hard to not only offer the extras that you're saying, but to tend to the concentrated need. Because there's this assumption that because we have less students in this, right? I look at a school that has 187 kids, MLK, for example. It's really hard because the needs of the students are still there. They don't walk away. The need doesn't walk away when the student walks away, if that makes sense, right? I still need that one social worker to service the remaining kids. It's not like I can say, okay, so 3 kids left, I'm not gonna need the social worker. No, I still need the entire complement of staff, and it becomes really hard. So it's not just about the extras. It's also about the basics.
Let me kind of switch gears a
Sure.
little bit on this, sort of staying with this theme. In the presentation, you did show 2019 figures, staffing figures versus the proposed budget, but you only did it for certain departments. So, or at least I couldn't find it. So I'm just kind of wondering, what's the, you know, the proposed budget total numbers looks like 2,872. Do you know what the total number was 2019, 2020, pre-COVID?
No, but we can certainly get that to you. Just to answer the question, the reason for that was we knew that there was a lot of wonderings, to be honest, about central office. So it was in the central office areas that we included the 1920. Just, you know, highlight the fact that the reductions are going below the pre-pandemic level. We have that for the school-based positions as well. We just didn't think we didn't expect people to be as concerned about it at the school level.
Well, I mean, just, you know, high level, is this number 2872 below where it was 2019, 2020?
Is the 2872 below where it was in 1920? Yes, it would be. I mean, we'll get you a number.
It is. So so you're proposing to have fewer staff than we had pre-pandemic. That's what I'm just trying to make sure I understand.
One way to think of this is we've talked about this often, that, right, with ESSER we funded about 260 positions, but you see an overall reduction of about 384. So one way to think of it is 124 positions beyond what was funded with ESSER.
Okay. So all of this must produce some degree of morale issues throughout the school, and raises the question as to what, you know, are there things that can be done to boost morale? You know, we are able to provide these extras here and there, but one concept that I've heard was to shorten our school day. I don't know that I was necessarily aware of this, but apparently our school day is a fairly long school day at this point, potentially longer than a lot of other school systems in Connecticut. So it sounds as though if there was some shortening in the school day, this might be a bit of a morale boost for this staff that's going to be potentially fairly overworked in this next budget year. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we can look at that in a variety of ways. From a I know you're talking about it from a morale perspective, but I also want to look at it from like functionally, it could functionally be a salary increase for staff if you look at it that way.
Absolutely,
It would
without paying them
have,
anymore.
it wouldn't have an impact on the budget deficit, right? I also think about how do we balance that with the needs of our students and our families. So I think that's a tension that we have to sort through, because like our families still will have to solve for the 10, 15 minutes or whatever it is, right, across the week. So we'd have to solve for that. I hear you.
Something to think about. One last question, if I may, Mr. Chair. It sounds as though, and, you know, we've been through a pandemic. We got some money from the federal government designed to try to help navigate and get kids back learning, et cetera. It sounds as though that we're not there. And so I'm you know, probably preaching to the choir here or asking the question to the choir, but let's you know, put it out there. Would it be your considered opinion that the federal government really needs to continue to fund education, that they really shouldn't be stopping at this point, and that this ESSER money should be continuing for another several years to get these kids back?
I laugh because at the beginning of the pandemic, you know, and I was saying, we're going to be in this space for at least 5 years, and folks were laughing at me back then. Almost like, no, it's going to be, you know, we're going to bounce back in a couple of years. No. And I will say that maybe a month ago when I was speaking to the Secretary of Education, and I asked the same question. What's the federal government going to do? And he said, well, we did what we had to do. Now it's at the states have to figure it out. It's at the state level where the decisions, right, the moves have to be made. I'm totally with you that, you know, the isolation, the added trauma, the interruptions in learning, all of that combined, that still plays out, not just for our students, but for our staff as well, right? We can't forget that staff too experienced the pandemic. So yes, I think we do need the additional funding. Now, do we need it at the degree that we have $50 million every single year? I wouldn't say that either. I wouldn't say that either. But do we need additional funding to continue to mitigate the impact of the pandemic? Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Mitchell.
Thank you. I think you should say that we need 50 million extra from the feds every year. Say that.
Sorry?
You should say that we need 50 million extra from the feds
Oh,
every year.
okay.
But I wanted to
That's
actually
what
go
you were
back
trying to
to,
tell me, okay.
I wanted to go back to something Councilman Gale was talking about the shortened school day. And you said it wouldn't affect the deficit. I know it doesn't affect it directly, but if we assume that it would boost morale, then maybe it also helps with the question of turnover. And I want to talk a little bit about, like, what is our turnover rate yearly? Do you know that?
We'll have to get it for you as well.
Or if you have a sense, how does it, I mean, I presume, and you've talked about this before, we lose teachers to other districts that pay more, so I presume that our turnover rate is higher than our neighbors, right?
That's fair. That could be fair, yeah.
So I just say to,
Yeah.
you know, that's another thing to think about the school day length. And, you know, I'm the parent of a small child. I don't love the idea of an even any bit shorter school day, but if that can help us with turnover, it does save us money, right? It costs money to hire new people and things like that. On a different note, in the presentation, early in the presentation, I don't remember where, no page numbers, you note that since 2010, there's been a 21% decrease in enrollment and a 197% increase in payments out. Do you know how, in that same period, since 2010, how has our number of in-school staff changed, right? Like, our enrollment has decreased by 21%, but what has happened with the number of in-school staff who are serving the enrolled students? Do you know the answer to that?
We will be able to get that information for you.
Do you have a sense of, has it track that? Or has it,
Oh,
have we
it has
lost
de-
more staff than we've lost students, is what I'm saying?
It has decreased. The number of FTEs have decreased. Specifically, like, right, we've never had the luxury to say we're going to keep added staff, especially on the magnet school side. It might have been a practice in the past when the fiscal picture looked brighter. It no longer is the luxury that we have to say, okay, you know, we budgeted for this teacher to have 23 kids in that magnet classroom. We only had 8 kids, and the rest of the seats remain empty. Let's still leave it that way. No, we don't have it.
Gotcha.
We don't have that luxury anymore.
What percentage or number, I guess, it doesn't really matter, of the schools have no music teacher or have a music teacher?
We can get that in, we have it now, yeah, and maybe you can say, compare it to like last year, or, yeah.
Well, I mean, because you had talked about a reduction since last year, but I'm curious about the overall number. Like, how many of the schools even have a music teacher?
I will also say that if we look back to 2010, we went back to 2010, and even in 2010, not all of our schools had, right, an art and music, but we do have, give a second, please.
I thought I had it more readily at hand. I know that there are 3 schools that have music this year that do not have it in their budget for next year, but just give me a second. I'll give
Well,
you-
so yeah, Councilman Gill points out that there's budgeted 29 music positions in total for 30.
We have 39 schools.
We have some that are funded, so again, small schools. We have some schools that have .5s where they're sharing a music teacher with another school, so it doesn't mean that only 29 schools have music.
We had 34, we went from 34 to 29
And I guess,
in music.
and art,
And
well,
art-
you can answer the same question for me for art, yeah.
40.8 to 34.
But
And
we
art.
don't, you don't know right now, like that 34, some of them may be split. We
Yes.
don't know how many schools have 0 art teachers there and how many have half
Got
an art teacher.
We have
Yes.
8 schools that don't have a music teacher in the budget for FY25. Just want to emphasize again, though, that, right, 5 of those 8 don't have a music teacher in their budget this year because they have different programming or instruction they've prioritized. So it's
I
only-
didn't hear that. They have different programming instruction.
Well, so they may have art or dance, but not music. So when I say there's 8 schools that don't have a music teacher in their FY25 budget, 5 of those 8 also don't have one in their FY24 budget, meaning it's not a change in those schools.
Well, no, I want to be clear. I'm not sort of meaning this as a criticism of you all for what you've done since last year. I'm just trying to get a sense of the lay of the land because I do, I see what kids have in neighboring towns, and they'll, I don't think anyone would say, well, it's okay that we don't have an art teacher because in this school we have dance. Like, they have dance and they have art and they have music and they have all that stuff. So I'm trying to get a sense of what it is here.
I think that probably connects to the question from Councilman Gale earlier around, like, what are all those extras, right? And the economies of scale that we're not able to maximize.
Got you. And just one last, and again, I'm not going to hold you to this, but I was trying to count through the missing positions and count out the positions that only came in because of COVID funds and figure out ballpark what would be the cost of restoring the missing positions other than the COVID positions that are in school. And what I came up with was 20.97 million. Does that sound about right?
Yes, 100 and... Yes, yes.
Thanks.
Councilman Thomas.
Yeah, just a quick question. So a few weeks back, I was here in council chambers with some seniors and juniors, and I heard about a great program, the Saturday Academy at Weaver. It's an awesome program where kids are able to come and get extra help and wash their clothes and, have some, stuff to do on Saturdays. I just want to know, is that going to be affected due to this budget? Is that still going to be able to happen in the capacity that it is happening now at Weaver? Or is that something that's not going to be able to happen?
So we are funding the community schools program. We're going to continue to fund that at Weaver, right? That's one of our schools. What I don't know yet, and we could ask the principal, I know that there are some teachers that work in that program and get a stipend. So there are funds in the school's budget for stipends. So I'm hopeful that they're gonna continue to provide the stipend for the teacher to do either the supervision that happens or the tutorial that I know also happens there.
Good. Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, so we're going to finalize with a few questions. Council President asked you about sharing services, and you mentioned procurement, purchasing, procurement, printing perhaps maybe. What about community schools? And I ask you that question only because as I've been thinking about this, the question that Council President asked is a question that I've been asking myself for the last few weeks. You know, it only makes sense in a way, why? Only because, and trust me, I worked really hard learning this acronym because the city does have already relationship with many of the FCSSP.
Good job.
It was hard for me, especially in English. That double S there, it killed me. So, because the city has these relationships built over many years, and it only makes sense, right, that will be a good place to have that partnership. What are your thoughts on that particular idea?
Yeah, I think there could be an opportunity there for, let me see if I understand. So for the city to fund the partners, the lead agencies as part of our community schools? No.
More like the city potentially taking over those, that function.
I could see it. We'd have to think about the FCSSP and then no longer being our employees. I mean, they would become city employees then, right?
Just wanted to put it out there, only because I saw some alignment
Yes.
in some aspects of what the community schools model is. And again, I'm not an expert. I don't work in that department, so I don't know that it's a full alignment. But I saw some areas.
Yes, because we have the FCSSPs that are in schools and support the work in the schools that are community schools. Not all of our schools are community schools. And so we can certainly explore what it would mean to have that aligned partnership. I do agree. I mean, the partners are the partners, right? We all know them. We all work with them. So from that perspective, I hear what you're saying.
Okay. Total different question. You mentioned earlier that you don't know yet the number of the natural attrition, whether that's via retirement. I guess retirement will be the most likely natural attrition. Is there any reason why it's almost the end of April and we don't have that number? We don't have that idea? What's the challenge to know that? I mean, normally I would think that if I'm a teacher and I'm going to apply for retirement, there's a process that sometimes takes some time. And why don't you know that number?
There's really no date for that. It's a requirement. We encourage people. We say, if you know that you're going to retire or you have an intention to transition from Hartford Public Schools, please let us know.
I'll just add, we work really hard on trying to communicate this, but it still is a misconception, so I feel like I should say it out loud publicly. When our folks retire, our teachers are 10-month employees, and their pay and their benefits continue through the end of August. But regardless of that, sometimes people feel nervous, right? Like if I tell you I'm retiring in April, am I still going to have health insurance in July? And they will, right? So we try to emphasize that, but there's still that misconception that causes people to wait to let us know.
Sure, but that's a wrong misconception. Then they're still going to get. But anyway, so the last question, and we'll finalize after this. I've heard you, Superintendent, speak about in the past about the vision of cradle to career. Or let's make it better, birth to career. More than the vision, unless you want to explain a little bit for the public and those who may not know what that vision looks like, I'm more interested in today, based on what we know today, based on the fiscal situation, based on the environment and the ecosystem that we have today, all these things taken into account, what are some actionable items today that are needed in order to get us on the path of that vision? Because once you explain the vision, I think there's a lot of buy-in into what it is, but that's just beyond the school district. I mean, this vision has a lot of other components that are beyond the school district. What are some actionable items? Because we've been talking about this for many, many years, not just you, but other folks in the community, and it just doesn't happen. What are some actionable items today that need to happen to get us there?
I appreciate your question. That's a vision, and that's actually a dream, I think, for me, only because I think about the level of need that exists in our city, and there's a lot of transiency within our city as well. And so I think well, first of all, I can't make the assumption that everyone knows what the vision is, but it is having multiple structures, but a key structure of partners that come together regularly and have an understanding and can pinpoint with data, where the health of, and I don't mean just physical health, the emotional health, whether or not a young person has stable living conditions, whether they have access to food and health care, from the minute they're born, actually, quite frankly, before they're even born. Like, we should be able to have a structure that captures that as the family and the young person is progressing. And when I overlay the financial challenges that many of us are in, it could provide an opportunity for us to determine what are the resources that exist across the city and the duplication of services that I guarantee you exist. Not because we mean to be wasteful with the resources that we have, but I think there's an opportunity for us to come to the table and say, okay, how many young people can you serve, and what kind of services can you provide? Oh, you do the same thing? Is it the same students? And who's following up on whether the services are being provided or not? It is not the school system, but because, right, so many of our young people are in the schools, I think it would benefit us as well. I know so many families that do access services outside of the schools. Sometimes we don't know, and vice versa. And so I think it would provide an opportunity for understanding the assets that we have across the city, the resources that we could potentially share, whether they're duplication of services in the areas that we have to focus in. I'll tell you right now that we did an asset map, for example, and we found that the majority of the services that are available for students outside of the school system either are in early childhood or on the other side, the opportunity youth high school side. There's not a lot for the in-between. And when we think about it, right, research says that we have to get to the students before they transition to 9th grade. If we don't have those strong services and supports, we know that they're going to be off track in high school. They're not going to graduate on time, and you know the spiral after that. So I might have given you more than that was an example. A next step would be getting some of the key partners to come together. But the idea is to have a data infrastructure and to be able to monitor what we're all doing at what point to support our young people, and by extension, right, their families.
All right, well, thank you very much. Well, there's one more question or one statement. Council President. Go ahead.
Go ahead, you finished?
No, yeah, I'm finished.
Staying with that same trend of thought of working together, I have been on the city council going on my second term. And one of the things I've come to, just met the board chair a couple of weeks ago. As you said, we are all serving the same constituents or youth in the city. And, we have a labor, education, what else? Thank you so very much. Committee, that it would really be good, because one of the things, I didn't know this crisis exists. Okay? You hear about, every budget year, you're short funding. For some reason, you know, you figure it out and it goes away. But if we talk with each other, you know, all year, then, you know, when we come to this point now, we would have developed relationship. We know what your concerns are in the Board of Education. You know what our concerns are from a city services, the services you just mentioned about sharing. You know, as the mayor starts a new sports, recreation and sports, or the new department, okay, which is going to be servicing our same kids, the youth, you know. So I think going forward, it'd be really, really healthy if we communicate and work with each other, because we're serving the same constituents. And when I hear you you spoke eloquently about where do we go from here. This is a great start. So, you know, for me, I'm going to thank you for myself, not the chair, you know, for the last two and a half hours of being here, and your knowledge base on what you have educated us and what the issues are, and, you know, put some solutions on the table and how we can go about solving it. So I hope, you know, going forward in this, you know, upcoming fiscal year, we'll have more communication with you, and we have this great department, a committee, that we can all come to and ask these questions, you know, for the next fiscal year.
I
So
look
thank you.
forward. I look forward to participating in those. I know that I've been to the department to talk about, I don't know, chronic absenteeism and safety and several other topics. More than willing to be there.
Yeah, but we also need to talk about all the good things.
Yes,
You know,
I would love to celebrate.
I'm sorry, Superintendent, but this is our fault that we have sold to our residents that suburban school is wonderful and great, and Hartford school system is we are lacking, okay? But let me be honest as a grandparent, okay? I don't want to get up at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning to send my child out to the suburbs. I think I can fight for the education right here. I pay taxes right here. And I can influence you more right here than I can Granby, East Granby, wherever else, Timbuktu, wherever our kids go. So I really, truly believe that we need to actually go out and actually sell ourselves better in our community, because something ain't happening. And I'm going to say, we're doing we're doing a really not so good job of selling what the assets we have here in the city of Hartford. So I'll get off of my soapbox. Thank you, ma'am.
Sure.
Well, with that statement, we're going to conclude our meeting, and this meeting at this point is adjourned.